I'm unbelievably humbled just to be here and be a part of this. A few weeks ago, I was at home and I just failed as a dad. We do that sometimes. I'm tired a lot. At the end of the day, I'm just spent. And you come home and you're doing homework, you're taking kids places, and we're just exhausted. You got nothing left in the tank. And I was just rearing into my kids. And so I went up to my son and I knelt down by his bed and looked at him. I said, I need to ask your forgiveness. I was just a jerk. And I said, men don't act this way. This is not how a man is called to act. And we talked and he looked at me. And my son's 10. And if time doesn't permit me to go into all the great stuff, he was in a playoff football game this weekend. And I was getting texts like crazy. My wife's calling me. I had to leave a couple of times. I don't want to miss those moments with my kids. I want them to know I care. But my son looks at me with these precious eyes and he just smiles and he goes, Dad, it's not a big deal. I think you're a little too hard on yourself. I looked at him and I said, I get that, son, but I take Jesus' words pretty seriously. When he says this is how we're supposed to live, I think he means it. And just because I'm tired doesn't give me an excuse. And I got to pray with my son. And I don't share that to talk about how great I am. I share it to show you that I still need the gospel. We still need the gospel. We still need this good news about Jesus and what he has done because we suck at being good. We do. We need the work of Jesus in our life. We need to be covered by his blood and his righteousness. And it's out of that we live. That's a sermon for another time. I'll stop. What I do want to say is I'm humbled to be here. I'm unworthy to be here. Former porn addict, manipulator, a sinner saved by grace. And nothing I say will be novel, nothing I say will be profound. But I find that what we often struggle with is not the profound, we struggle with the simple. I do at least. So let me pray for us, and then I'm going to walk through a few things. We're going to be in Luke later on. I tend to use a biblical passage because I think God has said it best, and so I try to elaborate upon what he's already communicated to us. Let me pray for us, and then we'll get started. Father, I pray that you remove pride. I pray that you just push away anything that would be an obstacle right now. I ask that you give us clarity. I know it's the end of a long day of busy lives. I know many people here are already advocates on behalf of poor people and broken people. I just pray, Lord, that you reinforce within us that we need to also be advocates out of the right perspective and for the right reasons. And sometimes advocacy is not as complicated as we make it out to be. So Father, help us be practical, help us be passionate, and help us be focused on the glory of Jesus in all things. Amen. There's a movie I love, and maybe you've seen it. This is going to date me a little bit. I'm finding as I'm working, by the way, with millennials and then Gen Z, I forget what the next generation is called. I just went to a big seminar learning about how people of this next generation beyond the millennials are learning and how they process information. But anyway, it's funny the things they don't know, and it's making me feel older. For example, most people in their 20s don't know the term postal, going postal. Like, they never experienced that. And so you can't use that as an illustration in a classroom because everybody's looking at you. I asked one guy the other day, he's got his master's degree, so we're not talking about like high school kids, we're talking about grown men and women. And I said, you know what the term going postal means? And he said, like sending out a whole bunch of packages at one time? Is that like, no, that's not what it means at all. So I love the movie The Matrix, and there's a scene in The Matrix where one of the main dudes who's been rescued from this complicated matrix alternative reality that's not even real, it's this digital reality that's been imposed upon people, and he's been freed from that, and he wants to go back in, and so he's meeting with the Matrix people, and he's eating a steak, and he says, I know this isn't real, but I want to go back in. I want to go back to the dream state. I want to be put back under and forget that what real reality is about. I want to go back to the dream state. But here's the truth of the matter. We can't go back to the dream state. When we've been exposed to the reality of injustice in our culture, we have a decision to make. We can't just pretend like we don't know that children and women are being abused in America and around the world in the way that they are. We can't pretend like 5-year-olds aren't being raped. I mean, dear goodness, we can't unlearn this. So what do? The other day, I have a friend. He's a businessman. He's been on this incredible journey for years. I'm sure he's a multi-millionaire. And he called me up with a very simple question. I was at my son's football practice, and that's a joyous time. And my phone rings, and I see it's him. We haven't talked in a while, so I pick up my phone, and I answered, and I said, "Hey, man, what's going on?" He goes, I have a question I'm just really wrestling with. And here was this question, a God-honest question. He said, "Should I give all my money away?" I'm like, well, I happen to this organization called Go 61. I said, what is going on? He said, I've been listening to Francis Chan. Now, that's a whole other conversation we're not going to get into right now. But he said, I'm struggling with the fact that I've been getting so much that I don't need, and there's so much need in the world. Why do I have this? What do I do with this? Now, if you know anything in the scriptures, there's 4 critical marks, and I'm not going to walk you through the various passages, but there's 4 critical marks of really what a disciple of Jesus Christ looks like. So a disciple of Jesus walks with God, they live in community, they make disciples, and they show compassion. And these are 4 marks that you see throughout the New Testament particularly that are exhibited in the life of every disciple of Jesus Christ. When we see it time and time again, they walk with God, they live in community, they make disciples, and they show compassion. So this last part is what you struggle with, because churches, especially pastors, are really good at promoting the first 2. They talk a lot about the third one, and the last one really only comes up when a sermon on tithing is available, or we have a guest speaker, or there's a tragedy or something like that. So he was wrestling with this last one. What is my God-given responsibility? And the reason I bring up that story, I began to talk about being led by the Spirit, what the Bible says about giving, and where our parameters were. But at the end of the day, he has to deal with that before the throne of God. I can't make that decision for him. But I think his question is one that hits us. Because any person that seriously looks at the global humanity crisis that we're facing, and they see the gospel mandate, they feel a tension of how much of myself do I give away. Right? I mean, I've got kids at home. Right now, I missed my son making the saving tackle in the playoff game, who had to talk to his dad on the phone to be here to talk to us today. How much of my time do I sacrifice to pursue this initiative? This is a struggle, right? How many bedtimes do I miss? How many meals at home? How much money do we sacrifice? Where is that invisible line? Now, I'm not going to answer that for us today, but I do want to increase the tension that within us all, we are wondering how much of ourselves do we give away in fighting this injustice. Because we know the world needs help, but we want to know how to help them and where to start, where those boundaries are. So today what I want to do is talk about this idea that while compassion is great, what does compassion look like in a practical way in my life? Now, I'm wording it this way for a reason, because we're very good at looking at how others need to be compassionate or how others aren't compassionate. President Trump, Puerto Rico, the White House, the government, Joel Osteen. And we're great at slandering these people on social media and talking about what dirtbags everybody else is. And how nobody else is doing enough. But how often do we step back and say, God, you know what? That's really between them and you. The question I need to be asking is, God, what do you want me to do? What are you asking of me? Because Joel Osteen and others will stand before the throne of God and give an account for that which they did or did not do in this life. But so will I. That's why there's passages all over the Bible, such as Matthew chapter 7, verses 3 through 5, that talk about, why are you trying to pull a splinter out of your brother or sister's eye when you have a log in your eye? And what are these passages, what are all these passages and commands in the New Testament stirring within us? They're not stirring within us to have a critical eye towards our neighbor. They're stirring within us to have a God eye on ourselves. And saying, who am I before God? But I want to bring up another issue. Because not only do we need to examine our life and how we're living in regards to being compassionate, But I think we need to make sure we're being compassionate for the right reasons. Again, we live in a global humanity. We can know in real time the devastation of warlords and natural disasters in a way never before in human history. It is unbelievable. We know more about human trafficking right now than ever before. And it is gaining a lot of traction because compassion is a cultural value. My fear is that sometimes, especially with the younger generation, that we are here because compassion is a cultural value, but that cannot be our primary motivation. We must also be motivated by the reality that compassion is a biblical mandate. So that even when the attractiveness of human trafficking is lost in our society, we continue to pursue justice for everyone because God commands it from us. And just in case we're not clear, I want to share a few verses with you. I'm going to go really fast this part. So if you're taking notes, you write quickly. Leviticus 19, 9, and 10, we see this idea of the margins being left in the fields, right? When you're harvesting the fields, make sure you leave the margins behind. Don't glean everything because even the animals need food. And so make sure you leave stuff behind. Psalm 41, 1, blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him. Proverbs 14:31, whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. Proverbs 17:5, whoever mocks the poor insults his maker. He who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished. Proverbs 19:17, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he, that's the Lord, will repay this person for their deeds. Proverbs 21:13, whoever closes his ear to the poor, to the cry of the poor, will himself call out and not be answered. Proverbs 22:9, whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor. Proverbs 29:7, a righteous man knows the rights of the poor. A wicked man does not understand such knowledge. Matthew 9:36, Matthew 14:14, Matthew 15:32 are just a few of the verses that talk about Jesus being moved with compassion because of what he saw. Matthew 25:31-46, the parable of the sheep and the goat, says that at the end of times, in the judgment of the nations of all people will be separated into two groups, and part of the defining characteristic that determines whether or not you are a follower of Christ is how you treated the poor and the oppressed and the broken in our society. Luke 14:12-14, he, Jesus, said to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Galatians 2:9 and 10 says that Peter, James, and John, these pillars of the church, when they sent out Paul and Barnabas on their mission journey, the one command they give them is not make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted in their theological matrix. Make sure their confession of faith is on the wall. Make sure we track attendance really well. Make sure that this giving chart is filled out. But is make sure, here was make sure you do not forget the poor. It's astonishing. Ephesians 4:32 talks about being kind and tenderhearted, forgiving as Christ forgave us. Colossians 3:12-13 say the same. Being generous in forgiveness. James 1:27, pure religion, or religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father, is this, to visit the orphan and the widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. James 2:14 and 16, what good is it, my brothers, if someone says they have faith and they do not have works, can that faith save them? For brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warm and filled, without giving them the things that they need for the body, what good is that? Listen to this passage, 1 John 3:17 and 18. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in that person? Little children, let us not love in word and talk, but in deed and in truth. So I want us to look at this idea of the Good Samaritan in Luke 10:25-27. Now I want to be clear about something as I get ready to read this. Jesus is addressing a very specific question. This individual who thinks they're righteous wants to justify themselves. They want to alleviate their conscience from the guilt and conviction they feel from being confronted with their lack of generosity and love towards those around them. That's what they want to run away. They want to find how close to the line of selfishness can I get and still be justified. But Jesus doesn't play those games very well. So he tells this parable. Now, so the heart of the parable is answering the question, who is my neighbor? And Jesus is going to answer that question by saying, anybody you come into contact with, bozo. Anybody you come into contact with, regardless of race, socioeconomic, gender identification, it doesn't matter. They are your neighbor. But in answering his question, Jesus gives us a glimpse into what compassion looks like. So I want to dig down there and highlight 3 areas in just a minute. But first, I just want to read the story to you. Luke 10, 25 through 37. And behold, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus, saying, Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? Now, Jesus' point here, by the way, is to eventually show the man that he cannot inherit eternal life on his own because his own righteousness is insufficient. It's another sermon. The lawyer answers, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. The lawyer, desiring to justify himself, because he knew he couldn't do this, said to Jesus, and who exactly is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man is going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest, I love that, by chance. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Now, many of you have heard this in church before. If you haven't, the Levite, this Jewish man, these guys would have been prominent figures in their community. It would be astonishing that they would respond the way they do. But at the same time, they don't want to be unclean, right? They probably have some pious, religious reason why they're doing this. So whatever, that's fine. What's shocking in this story is Jesus is going to take someone they despise, a Samaritan, probably of half-mixed race. The Jews couldn't stand them. They had created a false altar and a false temple up in there. The Samaritans were really despised by the Jewish people. And he's going to make this person the hero of the story. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, he came to where he was and he saw him. Look at this. He had compassion. Probably didn't even like it. These guys didn't like each other, but he had compassion. And he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, which would be like applying medicine in modern day context. Not boozing him up for the pain. And he set him on his own animal. He brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and he gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay when I come back. He gave him his American Express card. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And he said, the one who showed mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Now, I'm going to talk about this parable here in just a second, but before I do, I want to explain something. We often, I think, confuse compassion and empathy. I'll tell you how I define them, and there's no biblical explanation of this. I'm just going to give you a practical understanding. I think empathy is a strong feeling about something. It's when we identify with the hurts of someone else and we hurt with them. But the Bible doesn't call us just to be empathetic. The Bible calls us to compassion. Compassion is a feeling of empathy that motivates us to do something. And notice in this parable, he had compassion, and because of that compassion, he was compelled to do something. But yet so often, I think we stop at the feeling. We stop at empathy. Why? Now, I can't speak for you, but I want to share some of my own darkness. And one reason is because I think I'm self-focused. I am busy. My stuff's important. You know, some of my stuff is important. It's important to raise 4 godly kids who will one day replace me in society as a gospel witness. But I'm self-focused. I'm a selfish person. I'm also calloused. I mean, how many panhandlers can we see out on the streets of Springfield? At some point in time, you're like, what's up? I mean, it's weird. You're around it so much, it's not shocking anymore. Leave Springfield for a while and come back, and it will be shocking to see the depth of poverty in such a small area. It is not like this everywhere. But I'm also overwhelmed at times. And when I associate with IGM, when I hear Casey's stories, I'm just overwhelmed. I'm like, what can I do in the face of such evil? And I have stories I could share with you of just the evil of this world. And so I think because of that, sometimes I get stuck with empathy, but God doesn't call me just to be empathetic. He calls me to be compassionate, which compels me to do something. So how can we evaluate this? So today what I want us to do is I want us to be aware of our compassion gauges. What are they? I want us to check our compassion gauges. And here's my encouragement for everyone here. My prayer is that we would be motivated to move that compassion gauge up just a little. Just a little. So here we are. Oh, well, I want to back up a second. And I want us to do this, not just because of the biblical mandate, but because Jesus Christ, who is moved with compassion, fulfilled the law on your behalf, being the righteous second Adam, the Bible calls him. And he became our Passover lamb, if you're familiar with that term, and he died on a cross. And he shed his blood because the Bible says that without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. He died and he rose again because we could not fulfill the law on our own. And so Jesus became our substitute. And when we understand the depth of our transgression and lostness, and that his grace and mercy was lavished upon us while we were dead in our trespasses and sin, but God, being rich in mercy, made us alive in Jesus Christ. When we understand that and we place our faith in Jesus and say, God, when I stand before your throne, I believe that my sins have been paid for by your Son, Jesus Christ. And that through him, I have forgiveness and redemption of all my past, present, and future sins. And I claim the righteousness of Jesus on my behalf. I am unworthy. I deserve all punishment. I deserve eternal hell. But your Son, Jesus, paid my price for me. When we understand what Jesus has done, it should motivate us to be like-minded and like-hearted. So the first thing I want us to see in an area influenced by compassion with this man, and it's common sense. You're going to go, well, duh, was our clocks. Our time, right? The first thing, this man is inconvenienced. He's going down the road, this good Samaritan is. He sees somebody beaten. It's easy to go on the other side of the road. And by the way, this is where you robbed people on the road in that day. Let's put in a modern day analogy. When you're walking down a dark alley at night and you see someone on the side of the road by a dumpster with plenty of opportunities for you yourself to be mugged, how do you not know it's a setup? Walking down the road, there's no one else around. That's how robbers acted back then. There's a dude there, there's lots of brush. Any place to get attacked. How do I know that's not paint or fake or the last dude's blood that they've got hidden in the bushes? But he stops, gets off his donkey, the way to escape, right? To outrun him. Makes himself vulnerable. And walks over. Moved by compassion to check on the person. And in doing so, this significant individual, who obviously is someone of means and influence, is not traveling for kicks and giggles. They're not sitting there going, I think today would be a good day to go up to Jerusalem. They have a mission. They're on the road for a purpose, but they stop. And here's the thing I think I want us to realize. Compassion overrides convenience. It does. Do you know the average American as of 2014 spends 5 hours a day, 22 to about 45-year-old, watching TV? I just want us to process that. We're so busy entertaining ourselves to death that we're missing a world that is dying. Because we're too busy indulging in immorality on TV and sucking it into our soul and then feeling proud that we're not participating. God help us. What about us? Is our time influenced by a heart of compassion? When we see a problem, do we pause and check it out? Do we listen to other people's problems? Do we take time to play with that neighborhood kid who's out in the front yard throwing that ball up in the air to themselves? Or just drawing out a hopscotch sitting on the sidewalk by themselves? Do we just stop and engage and say, what's up? Or are we afraid people might think we're a predator? Or why is an adult talking to kids? Why are adults not talking to kids? Well, why have we allowed predators to make somehow engaging children inappropriate? And children who long for role models and they're hanging out and they're spending out. You know the conversation I had today with someone? This was the phone call I got today coming to our conference. My first grader was hanging out in the backyard and the first grade girl on the other side of the fence showed him her smartphone and asked him to hump the dog so she could record it. What do I do? Where's dad of that daughter? So we had to walk through, how do you engage that parent? If this is here in Springfield, 6-year-olds asking to record each other humping dogs. We volunteer investing time. Everybody wants to volunteer at their kids' school, but what about these crappy schools downtown that nobody wants to go into? And what about those schools that are underfunded? The teachers can't keep track of the kids because they drop out and they move 2 or 3 times a year because their parents can't hold down a job or they're trying to move around from place to place after they get evicted in the course of a year. Who's volunteering there? Who's going in and providing stability there? And there's all kinds of places around here, right? Convoy of Hope. Children's Ministry at Church, Go 61, Harmony House, Pregnancy Care Center, Freeway Ministry. I mean, I love Go 61. But dear goodness, if this isn't the place, where is the place to engage our world? I got an idea. Maybe this isn't your thing, but God is moving you to call it with compassion for a gospel witness in a world that needs it. How about this? How about just go down to the hospital, Mercy or Cox, and go up to the children's cancer floor. Why don't you just go door to door and walk in and hang out with kids and say, you know what, this dude named Jesus has kind of changed my life and I just thought I'd hang out with you. Yeah, but Jesus gave me cancer. Yeah, but Jesus sent me you. Or sent you to me. Got us together so I could talk to you about his love and hang out with you. You want to play Barbies? You want to color on the coloring book? What do you want to do? Because you're the most important person in my life right now. Let's just hang out. Get to know the parents. I think when we just begin to think about life differently and we just break out and realize we are part of a community, it changes our perspective of how we spend our time. Now, I don't think that our design is that we're to go 100 miles an hour nonstop without any kind of break or recreation. That's not what I'm saying. But there are moments in life where we have to stop when we are confronted with the reality of the need and we need to pause and get off of our horse, get off of our donkey and walk and engage because we're moved with compassion. This is not a tweetable moment. This is an action item. Or this is more than just a post on social media or a red X on our hand. This is talking about changing the way we live our life to engage and become more aware of humanity. I could tell story after story. But many of you have heard these. This whole weekend. How often do we take time just to write our senators or congressmen? And honestly, I will tell you this. The best way to communicate, as odd as it sounds, especially for the older generation, with your congressmen and senators is to tweet them. Most of our congressional leaders handle their Twitter accounts themselves. The mail all gets processed through somebody else. But I can communicate directly with our congressional leaders through Twitter. It's the oddest thing. But it works. How often are we communicating on a state, national, or even local level, advocating for the poor, the underprivileged, the abused, and neglected? I mean, how often do we stop just to report odd behavior? Well, what if I'm wrong? Well, that's okay. Just take time to do it. And on we could go. Stop and talk to people on the side of the road. But beyond this, here's the biggest thing about our time. As we look at our clocks, if we want to really move the needle on this issue, let's stop engaging in behavior that is contributing to human trafficking. In a room this size, statistic tells me that the majority of guys here are actively looking at porn. You are. You're ashamed of it. You want to stop. I get it. Blah, blah. This is a woman, more often than not, that does not want to be in this industry. You ever see the behind-the-scenes footage of some of these women when they get done with a porn act and they're weeping? These are human beings that we have, as I talked about earlier, turned into orgasmic eye candy, and we're dehumanizing people to simply to serve our needs. And the more actively we are engaged in pornography, we are changing the chemical makeup of our brains and how we engage and how we think. There's actually scientific studies that we are callousing the pleasure senses of our brain, very similar to a cocaine addict. People are engaged in prostitution, drugs, buying clothes from companies that don't follow fair trade standards, and eating certain luxury items that are often harvested through slave labor. So, it's not only us engaging our time in the right ways, it's us making sure we're not engaging our time in ways that are contributing to this problem. So my question for me is, do I take time, and does my time reflect a heart for others? Let's just look at our clocks. Beyond that, the most obvious one, right, with the Good Samaritan is look at our coins. Look at our money. He made a financial commitment in this deal. And not only did he make a financial commitment, he said, open-ended check, whatever expenses it takes, put it on my account. Are my financial concerns seasoned with a concern for others? Notice what I'm saying. I'm not saying God is calling you to give it all away, but maybe he is, maybe he's not. I don't know. But are my financial concerns seasoned with a concern for others? Is it there? I've seen children in recent years become more, because children have everything they want for the most part, and most of our kids do. I've seen them start saying, Dad, Mom, instead of a birthday party this year, instead of spending money, hey, can we ask for donations to go towards Go 61 or this ministry or that ministry? Hey, can we make a difference in this world? Can we try to move the needle just a little bit in combating this injustice? What if we adults took that habit? And partner with organizations. I see all kinds of things happening, and even in Springfield, and I don't know if you know, but you can issue payday loans in Springfield. Do y'all know the whole payday loan issues in Springfield? Do y'all know about this? You can issue payday loans according to law. It's around 2,000+% interest. I forget what the interest level is that you can charge on payday loans. Ungodly. An impossible tsunami of financial consequences that you cannot get out of if you're poor and desperate. You know what one church in Springfield decided to do? They wanted to help address all the poverty issues, and so what they started doing is they partner with a financial institution, and they are personally resourcing payday loans at a reasonable rate to make it sustainable for people to get out of debt. The church is doing that. Because lawmakers refuse to intervene and say, this is inhumane and unfair. How are we using our money? Giving money to organizations like Go 61. Yeah, I don't give an unbelievable amount of money. I just have a small amount of money every month. I just say, you know what? I have a variety of people that we support in addition to our local church that we give money to, and Go 61 is one of them. And I want to challenge you with something. By the way, I believe a tithe. If you're not a Christian here today, you're just going to sound awkward and weird and crazy to you. But I believe in the New Testament calls us to give 10% of our gross income back. I believe we're called to tithe from our first fruits. That's why Jesus, when he's addressing the Pharisees, he says, you tithe from your mint and your dill, and you're even tithing your herbs. And then he makes a statement, you should do such things, but you shouldn't neglect the weightier matters of the law. And Jesus is affirming that the right to understand that this Old Testament principle still applies, and acknowledging all blessings come from God. And yet time and time again, I talk to people about generous giving, and they go, I can't give anymore. Really? I'm not saying, again, you got to give everything away, but most of you in here are paying probably a third to a half as much on your stupid cell phone bill as you are on your mortgage. On a device solely that you just use primarily to play Candy Crush and send texts all day. Cancel the internet. Cancel your cable. Stop using Redbox. Stop going to the movies. Downsize your house. Quit eating out so much. Turn off the lights regularly. Cut your 401k. We are more afraid of not having a retirement than we are that a child will be raped because of a lack of funding to help rescue them. Let me rephrase that. I worry more about if and when I'll be able to retire than what happens to kids around the world trapped in poverty. Stop doing sports, cut your own grass, cancel Christmas, stop buying new cars, shop at the Goodwill, work a second job. There's a reason immigrants come to our country and become wealthy. Because we are not exempt for opportunities for those who are willing to sacrifice. We've just become accustomed to getting it without sacrifice. I would challenge everyone in this room to make one commitment financially. Go home and look at your tax returns. And if your spouse isn't here, this is difficult, right? Because it often takes a partner commitment. And there is inevitably always every year a lack of men involved in this conference and every other conference on this topic. But I would encourage you to pull your tax return and see how generous you were financially last year. How much of our, because most of these organizations do tax deductible receipts, right? So you get this. So what percentage of my income did I give away last year? And then say, this next year, I wonder if there's a way for us to move that 0.5%. 0.5%. That might only be $20 a month for some of you. So I think when we talk about financial, we're thinking about hundreds of dollars. Maybe it's $20 a month that you say, God, I'm going to trust you, and here's what I'm going to do in return. I'm going to fast one day a week at work to make up for that. Whatever it is. In other words, it's not like I'm just expecting the money to fall out of the air, but at the same time saying, God, I'm going to test this principle. I'm going to be generous, and I'm going to ask you, I'm going to sacrifice as well, but I'm going to ask you to help make up the difference. You will be amazed at how often God will honor your generosity. He doesn't have to. You'll be amazed at how often he does. So the question is, does my bank statement reflect a compassionate character? I heard a story recently. I've shared a similar story before here and elsewhere. This is a different pastor that I recently heard of, where the church had to intervene because it was an inner city church. And they got a call from the wife that the pastor kept coming home and all of his money was gone. And that he was getting home really late at night and missing dinner and all these other stuff. And the church was like, what is going on? And so they met with the man and said, what is happening? And what they found out when they investigated was every day when he was leaving the church, when he went out the front of the church, he was so moved by seeing all the people in the city that were hurting, was every day he gave all his money away and he was spending time ministering to people and he was never making it home. And the church had to begin to give his paycheck and other things to his wife to make sure he didn't give it all away before he got home at the end of the day. My friends, there are people around the world, I promise you, there are people in the United States who are desperately fighting this evil just like we are. Just because they're in this room, don't believe that you're the only one not giving in and you're the only one fighting. We're a part of the process. We're a part of the movement. I don't think any of us are in jeopardy of giving ourselves into poverty. We are dressed way too nice for that. But notice thirdly, this is something interesting that maybe you haven't noticed in this text. Not only are our clocks to be a gauge of compassion, not only are our coins a gauge of compassion, but our conversation is a gauge of compassion. What I find startling is what the man did and did not say. What the Good Samaritan said and didn't say. He did not speak ill of this man when he dropped him off at the end. He spoke to him as if he was another contributing member of humanity. Considering the animosity between these two groups, this is startling how he speaks about him. So do I talk about people in poverty? How do I talk about people in poverty? When I see people crying in Walmart, do I walk over and encourage them? When there's a coworker struggling in crisis, do I engage them in conversation and speak to them with dignity and with honor? And more than that, in my conversation, am I weaving the gospel into the conversation? This good news that Jesus died and rose again to redeem us and save us spiritually for an eternal heavenly home? Or do I simply seek to initiate social justice? I have quit contributing to organizations that are only concerned with rescuing people physically and not ministering to them spiritually. I recently talked to a friend of mine. He is the founder and director of the 514 Initiative. They work with refugees, and they also work with orphans in Rwanda and Uganda. They work with refugees from around the world, but orphans, particularly in Rwanda and Uganda. And he's adopted 2 children from Uganda. He's got 3 biological children and now 2 adopted kids. And the other day, he and I met, and we were hanging out. He drove up to Virginia. He was part of a video series for a class with me, and we were talking, and I asked him, his name's Jimmy Renslow, and I said, Jimmy, hey, what's going on? He said, I believe God's getting ready to move us. And I said, why? He said, well, because our government is shutting down and allowing refugees to come here, and I believe it's important, so I believe God is calling us to go there. So he and his family are moving to Berlin, Germany, so that they can engage refugees, since we won't let refugees into our country. And what was beautiful about this conversation I talked to Jimmy is they're not just looking at helping refugees find connections and be restored, but they want to see them come to know Jesus Christ, and it's all part of the process. When we see someone speeding through traffic, do we call them dirty names, or do we stop and pray and say, God, I don't know what's going on in that person's life, but something's calling them to drive in such a ridiculous way. Would you just give them peace right now? Whatever circumstances are going on, would you help it to be used in their life to cause them to think about eternity and ultimately come to faith in Christ if they don't know him? When we see the hurting and needy, do we pray for them? That's a form of our conversation too. I shared this in our church. I was sitting at dinner one night, and one of our children was praying around the table, and they said, God, I pray for all of the hungry people in Springfield, that you would minister to them and you would help provide food for them. And the first thought that went through my mind was, that is so ridiculous. And the second thought that went through my mind was this: how dare I believe in an all-powerful God and not pray in all-powerful ways? How can I say I believe in an all-powerful God and not pray in all-powerful ways? Why do my kids have better prayers regarding what it means to be compassionate and thoughtful as we sit down and gorge ourselves? And we could get into the politics of why these people are going hungry and where they're spending their money, and I get all of that. What I'm saying is our conversation seasoned with grace and compassion? Earlier I talked about The Matrix. One of my favorite scenes in The Matrix is Neo. He's being jacked into the Matrix. He's got this spike in the back of his head, and he's getting all this information downloaded, and he wakes up, he opens his eyes, and he goes, I know Kung Fu. Because he just had it downloaded through a disc into his brain. And Morpheus, a guy, if you haven't seen it, you got to see it. Anyway, Morpheus leans over and goes, show me. And also they appear in a dojo and they start fighting. And it is so stinking cool. James 2:14, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes or daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? Show me. In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action, is dead. In other words, true faith always manifests itself with action. It does. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe there is one God? Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. At the heart of my friend's question at the very beginning, should I give everything away, is a very biblical understanding that goes back to Genesis 12. And it's part of the Abrahamic covenant. And when God talked to Abraham and he called him, he says, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that, purpose clause, you will be a blessing. So the reason my friend called me the other day to ask if he should give it all away is because he understood a basic principle that God gives us blessings so that we in return can be a blessing. That's always been his design for his people. So what about us? Are we willing to up the game on our compassion gauges? And my prayer for all of us, as simple as it is things that you're probably already doing, but will we just take a minute at the end of this conference, maybe over dinner tonight, maybe in our journal, maybe in our quiet time tomorrow, whatever it is, just to check out our compassion gauges regarding our clocks, our coins, and our conversations, and saying, God, which of these areas over the next year, maybe it's next week, maybe it's the next 6 months, whatever time frame God gives you, which of these areas do you want me to focus on, and can I be just a little more compassionate and intentional? Because part of the key of stopping and eradicating human trafficking in our world is making sure in our little window that we do what we can to bring humanity to others who are made in the image and glory of Christ. I made this statement at the end of last year, and I want to make it again today. We can't change the world, but we can change someone's world. And I think if we would just live with a long-term faithfulness in view and not the desire for immediate gratification, we give $5 and we want to immediately see how that $5 helps that person. That's not how the world works. And at the end of the day, honestly, you need to give that $5 not just to make a difference, but because God is leading you to give the $5. And we give out of faithfulness for what God has done in our lives. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for just the privilege once again to speak to this group. God, I'm humbled, I'm unworthy. And I pray this doesn't come across as a sage on a stage spewing grand wisdom, but God, as someone, a co-laborer in the faith, who desperately desires to be an authentic representation of Jesus to a world that desperately needs him. Father, I pray that we continue to fight in anticipation of your coming kingdom in Jesus' name.